A little bit earlier than anticipated, but the postman dropped off a big lump of aluminium for me today. So it's a 2-inch square piece of 6086, which means I can now crack on with machining the clamps. What I need to do now is just cut off a small section of this big lump and then think about how I'm going to machine it. As we can see, I've cut a lump off. What I do now is I just clean up this face in the milling machine. I'll also find the centre across the width and centre drill for the centre of this hole, and then because it's a nice rectangular shape, that should easily slip into the forge jaw, from which I can then drill and bore the central hole. This will just be a quick clean up using a slot drill. I'm not looking for anything fancy, just to get rid of that horrible finish from where I used the disc cutter. The dial was not particularly clear because of the light, but I'm getting around about 0.01 millimeter run out, more than accurate enough for what I'm after. The thickness of the block top to bottom at the moment is 2 inches, that's 50.8 millimeters. I only actually need the depth to be 35. What I'm going to do now is, before I actually drill and bore the hole, I'm going to take off 10mm from this side, leave myself 5mm to play with on the other side. So I'll just face that off first. I've reduced the thickness now. I took off a little bit more in the end, so I'm around about 37mm. What I'll do now is I'll just centre drill it and bore it. That should be bored out now to 34.7 millimeters. I'll do a quick check. I've got this little mandrel, or this bush that I use with the rotary table. Whilst I'm here at the lathe, what I'll also do now is I'll swap this around, face off the other side to get the clamp to the required thickness, top to bottom. And then once I've done that, I'll actually face off both the ends, this end and this end, in the forge jaw, get them to length. So I've got the overall length of the clamp machined and the dimensions from the fork hole to the back and the fork hole to the front. So we now have the top to bottom dimension machined. We have the end to end dimension and the distance from the bore to the ends. These two remaining sides don't really matter because I will be machining the radius around the clamp here. However, I am just going to do a skim cut on one side. That will help as a reference when it comes to marking out, which is what I'll be doing next. Using the last face that I machined in the lathe as a reference against the surface table, I can use the vernier height gauge to mark off some of the key dimensions. So I've got the centre line across the middle. Not sure how visible that's going to be. The outer marks for the part I need to machine away. Likewise for the dimensions on the section that's going to be clamping the riser. My next operation now is to cut the slot which will locate the handlebar riser. So the workpiece is clamped into the machine vise on the milling table. The top here is actually the front, and this face facing me is actually the top of the clamp. This is my reference edge, so I'm going to use the edge finder to find this edge, and therefore can determine the centre of the workpiece, and then it's just a very simple operation with an end mill to cut that slot to the required depth. I've taken this side down to 5mm across. I'm really nervous actually if there's going to be enough meat to really give it some support. The other side at the moment is 7mm. I'm going to leave this as is for now, and then carry on with the other machining operations and rethink whether I want to take that all the way down to 5 or maybe leave as is. Not sure yet. Whilst I've got the vise on the drilling table, I'll use it to clamp the workpiece and to drill the clamping holes in the workpiece, so the pair of holes that need to go at the back to clamp it onto the fork leg, and then the holes required to clamp against the riser itself. Normal process, I use the edge finder to get two of the edges and then use the DRO from there. The first pair of holes I drilled were the tapping size, so 5mm for an M6 tap, and I'm now going to run a 6mm drill down halfway through the block, so that'll be the clearance for the bolt. And likewise for the clamping screws for the riser, I've drilled the bottom pair here at M5 tapping size, which is 4.2mm, and I'm now just going to do clearance for 5mm on the top two. Before I move the vise from the milling table, I'll just quickly cut the threads for the fork clamp and also for the riser clamp. I've flipped the piece in the vise, so what was down below is now on top. So now just a quick job of running these taps through. The workpiece is fixed onto the rotary table, and the rotary table itself has been centred directly below the centre of the quill. So from here on it's a fairly simple exercise to cut this radius. I normally do these by eye, which is why I've got the scribed lines front and back. This is the front of the clamp and this is the rear of the clamp. What I'll do is I'll fix the y-axis front and back, and I'll move the x-axis off to my right, which is away from the camera, and then start to bring the radius in. So I managed to finish facing it off with the end mill. I was really pushing the limits of my milling machine here. It's not really designed to take such loads. As you can see, a lot of chatter at both ends. I'm going to have to think of a different way when it comes to doing one of the two clamps. Anyway, let me get this out, give it a clean up, file off some of this chatter marks and scrub up some of the corners and see how it looks. I've managed to clean up the clamp with some files and some memory. It's not looking too bad now. Before I cut the slit at this end for the clamping operation to actually work, I'm just going to run this radius cutter around these four edges just to give them a bit of a nicer look, and I'll probably do the same on the other end. To cut the slit for the clamp, I am of course going to be using a slitting saw. This is a 2mm thick one, so that's just what I'm looking for in terms of the thickness of the hole. As we can see, the workpiece is firmly clamped into a machine vise, and I've used a small square at the back here or the right to ensure that it's set correctly. On to the final couple of operations to finish off this clamp. What I need to do now is just open up or counterbore both of these holes to allow for a Allen cap socket screw. That's a 10mm diameter across the head there. I don't have a 10mm slot drill, but I do have a 1332, which equates to just over 10.3 mil. So that's quite a nice size, gives a little bit of leeway for the head. The final job for the clamp was to drill the holes in the riser. I did that off camera as a relatively simple job. I spotted through from the clamp itself and then drilled out the holes 5 mil diameter. The clamp will be held against the top of the fork leg with the 2 clamping bolts, 2 M6 bolts, Allen cap heads, as you can see here. I will need to turn a couple of small diameter washers to suit. And then the riser is clamped in position using 2 M5 Allen cap bolts. Deliberately using bolts here because I want the plain shank to help secure the riser. So that's a 5 mil diameter on the shank, which is the diameter of both the holes at this end, the clearance holes, and the holes through the riser itself. And of course the far side is tapped M5. At the moment I am running the bolts through and then fitting a couple of nylock nuts to help secure as lock nuts. When I was machining the recess to clamp the riser, I did note that I was a bit concerned about the thickness. As we can see, I've left it as I machined it, so one side is 5 mil, the other side is 7 mil. And likewise on the riser itself, I've got the shorter shoulder on the left to the inside and the longer shoulder on the right to the outside. So this will be the right hand clip-on for the bike. I'll now machine the other clamp and then move on to turning some handlebars themselves using some aluminium.